house. The last person anyone expected to find crouching on the marble floor of the Radnor's lobby at 8:47 on a Tuesday evening was Seo Ji-hoon. Not because he wasn't in the building. He owned the building. He lived in it. 3 federal agencies had spent the better part of a decade trying to build a case against him and had, eventually, put the paperwork away. And yet, here he was, a 32-year-old man in a suit that cost more than most people, earned in a month, down on one knee on polished stone, asking a 3-year-old girl the name of the stuffed yellow giraffe in her arms. The girl told him it was called giraffe. He said that was a good name. She nodded once, with great seriousness, as though she had expected him to agree. Then, the glass doors opened. The girl's mother stepped through. And what happened over the months that followed, the way it started, the way it nearly came apart, and the choices that changed both of their lives. None of it was planned by anyone standing in that lobby. Not even close. If you've ever had someone walk into your life at exactly the wrong moment and somehow make it the right one, you're going to want to stay for this. This story doesn't end the way you think it will. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. And if this channel is new to you, subscribe now, because what comes next is the part people don't forget. Seo's security group occupied the 31st floor of the Radnor, 421 West Huron Street in River North. Fully licensed, fully audited, contracts in 11 states. A client list that included 3 private hospitals and 1 federal judge who had learned early in their relationship not to ask questions about the other work. The paperwork was clean. The audits passed. What moved underneath the audits was a different conversation, one Ji-hoon had never needed to have with anyone who wasn't already inside it. He had built it from nothing. Not family money, not owed capital. Just the specific patience of someone who had watched how Chicago worked before he was old enough to participate in it. He had carried a knife scar between his right thumb and forefinger since he was 16. A reminder, though he needed none, that patience was the only kind of power no one could take from you. The apartment on the 29th floor was the most honest thing about him. He had bought it 7 years ago and moved in desks, a bed, a coffee machine, and almost nothing else. No sofa. No table with chairs around it. The walls were bare. People who came to the Radnor for business never came to the apartment. And the people who came to the apartment were not the kind who commented on what was missing. He had told himself for 7 years that the quiet was a choice, that the empty rooms were deliberate. He had believed it without much effort because there had never been much evidence otherwise. The evening of October 14th began the way most of his evenings did. A call from Danny Park at 6. Security reports at 7. Dinner from the Japanese place on Erie at 8. The same order they knew by heart. At 8:47 p.m., the phone on his desk rang. The voice belonged to Eddie. 9 years on the night desk, unflappable by training and by nature. Tonight, he was neither. Mr. Seo, we have a situation in the lobby. Ji-hoon reached for his jacket before Eddie finished the sentence. Amara Carter was 3 years old and had learned, approximately 2 weeks prior, how to work the release clasp on the bottom of her stroller. She had not shared this with her mother. She had been waiting for the right moment. She had chosen this one. The lobby of the Radnor was large and cool and deliberately, still, the kind of silence expensive buildings cultivated the way other places cultivated warmth. Amara had walked in through the automatic glass doors, sat cross-legged on the polished marble, and produced Gerald from under her coat. Gerald was a yellow stuffed giraffe, 9 inches tall, neck resewn 3 times by 3 different hands in 3 different shades of thread. White, then blue, now red. The stitching was visible. Amara had never seemed to mind. Ji-hoon came off the elevator and found her before his security team did. He crossed the floor. He went down to her level, the suit, the shoes, all of it lowered to 3-year-old height, and looked at her. She looked back at him the way children look at things that are very tall. Then she held Gerald out. He asked what its name was. She considered this carefully. Giraffe, she said. He told her that was a good name. She nodded once, as though she had expected him to agree. Two of his guards stood 6 feet away, wearing the expressions of men who had prepared for most contingencies, and not this one. Ji-hoon stayed where he was. He had navigated difficult situations for 11 years. None of them had involved a stuffed giraffe named after him by someone he had met 40 seconds ago. The glass doors opened 4 minutes and 17 seconds later. Naomi Carter came through them at the specific speed of a mother, calculating how badly something could have gone, and still working out the remainder. She was 28 years old and still in the blue scrubs from her shift at Meridian Community Health that morning. She found Amara with her eyes before she had fully cleared the entrance, crossed the floor, and crouched. Hands first, then head, the fast automatic inventory of someone who had learned to count before she breathed. She found nothing wrong. She stood. She looked at Ji-hoon, who had risen when she came in. I'm so sorry. I was just across the street at the pharmacy. She was in the stroller. I don't know how she even. It's all right. I was only gone 5 minutes. This has never happened before. It's all right. I can't believe He said it a third time, with the patience of someone prepared to repeat it as many times as necessary. Then, when she drew breath for another round, that's 4. You don't need a 5th. She stopped. He said, she's fine. We discussed the giraffe. A pause. What did it say? Its name, Ji-hoon said, is Giraffe. Naomi looked at her daughter. Amara held Gerald up for confirmation. Naomi looked back at the man in the expensive suit, who had apparently just held a naming ceremony with her 3-year-old on his lobby floor, and something moved across her face. Something she didn't have a word for, and she filed it away without addressing it. Balak. Behind her, Imani was 11 years old and wearing the expression of someone who had spent the last 7 minutes praying for the floor to accept her. Kofi, 7, was still holding the ceramic bowl of cereal he had been eating when their mother said, "We have to go find your sister," because he hadn't had time to put it down and also hadn't particularly wanted to. They left 10 minutes later. Amara went back into the stroller without protest, apparently satisfied with how her evening had turned out. Imani walked out without making eye contact with anyone. Kofi finished the cereal. Ji-hoon stood in the lobby. 47 seconds, that was how long he stood there after the glass doors closed, watching the 3 kids and their mother move west down Huron Street, before he remembered where he was supposed to be. Later that night, at 11, he sat at his desk on the 29th floor with the week's reports in front of him and did not read the reports. The apartment was quiet. It was always quiet. He had chosen it that way, maintained it, told himself for 7 years that the silence was the point. Terrad. Tonight, for the first time, it occurred to him that the quiet was just quiet. Nothing more than that. What Ji-hoon didn't understand yet was why he had stood in his own lobby for 47 seconds watching them leave through the glass, before he remembered where he was supposed to be. The quarterly administrative review at Meridian Community Health ran 40 minutes by design and required no one above the level of department supervisor to attend. 3 of the 4 previous quarters, Ji-hoon had sent Danny Park. This quarter, he went himself. Then he went again. Then, once more after that, Danny updated the calendar each time and said nothing. The clinic staff learned quickly that when the man in the expensive suit asked about patient intake numbers, he wanted the real ones, not the polished version. They gave him the real ones. He read them himself without comment and left without explanation. What none of them had prepared for was the 7-year-old. Kofi Carter had no filter. This was not for lack of instruction. Naomi had tried. He was simply built without one. The kind of child who introduced himself to dogs before their owners and asked strangers in grocery checkout lines why they looked sad. He found Ji-hoon on a Thursday afternoon in November, sitting in the small supply office, at the end of the hallway reviewing a vendor invoice, and walked in as though he had been expected. Ji-hoon looked up. Kofi looked at his right hand, specifically at the scar between the index finger and the thumb, Sisifinichi of the index finger and the Tirzumwat, half an inch of raised skin from a Tuesday night in Pilsen. When Jihoon was 16 years old, adults noticed it and looked away. That was the standard courtesy extended to Mark's people didn't want to explain. Kofi did not look away. You got hurt there. Jihoon set down the invoice. Yes. With what? The room was quiet except for the muffled noise from the waiting area and the old HVAC system working harder than it should have needed to. Jihoon could have said many things. He had said many things over many years to questions he did not want to answer. This time he told the truth. A knife! When I was your age, times 2. Kofi considered this information with the gravity it apparently deserved. Did it hurt? Yes. Does it still hurt? No. Okay. He pulled from his jacket pocket a small hardcover notebook, the kind that cost $1.19 at the pharmacy, and placed it on the edge of the desk. Do you know how to play chess? Jihoon had learned from a man named Mr. Park, not Danny Park, who ran a dry cleaning shop on 18th Street in Pilsen and kept a board behind the counter and taught anyone who asked. Jihoon was 12 when he learned. Mr. Park died the winter. Jihoon turned 19. He had not played since. I know the pieces, he said. Kofi opened the notebook to the first blank page and wrote the date in the upper corner. That's enough to start. They played for 40 minutes. Kofi won in 23 moves and walked Jihoon through the 3 decisive ones after the game ended. He recorded the result in the notebook. The date, who won. A brief note about the move that settled it. In careful handwriting that belonged to someone who understood that records existed to be learned from. Jihoon watched him write and said nothing. When Naomi appeared in the doorway to collect her son, Kofi announced that they had played chess, that he had won, and that Jihoon knew the pieces. Naomi looked from her son to Jihoon with an expression she kept carefully neutral. Jihoon confirmed that both statements were accurate. No one said anything further. He stayed in the clinic an hour and a half after they left. Imani arrived the following week. She sat against the wall of the waiting room and took from her backpack a workbook whose cover read 5th grade mathematics. Skills and practice. The problems on the open page were algebra. The kind normally taught in 8th grade, sometimes 7th for students who moved fast. The girl was 11. Jihoon did not stop the first time he passed. He went to check the supply inventory, finished, came back 15 minutes later. She was still on the same page. Alec. Her posture had shifted the way posture shifts when someone has been working in one place too long and is starting to meet a wall. He stopped. He looked at the page, picked up a pen from the desk behind her. Mrs. Okafor's, uncapped, and leaned down just far enough to write 2 words in the margin beside problem 7. Step 3. He put the pen back, walked out. Imani found the missing step. The next 4 problems took her 30 minutes. She did not say thank you. He did not wait for it. By December, the visits had their own shape. Kofi brought the notebook. Imani worked in the corner and occasionally accepted corrections she pretended not to need. Amara, on the days she came with her mother, had renamed Gerald the giraffe and introduced it to Mrs. Okafor, 2 nurses, and the small potted plant in the corner of the waiting room. The plant did not respond. Amara considered this acceptable. Naomi managed all of it with the efficiency of someone who had long ago learned to run a complicated machine without help. He noticed this, then kept noticing. She remembered every patient's name. She reorganized the entire records system in her 3rd week without being asked. And when Mrs. Okafor remarked on it, she apologized as though she had overstepped. She hadn't. She had simply seen a problem and fixed it, the way someone does when they have spent years fixing things without being credited. When Jihoon told her that her salary would be adjusted from January to reflect the work she was actually doing, she said, "You've already done things for us. I'll make it up to you." He looked at her. "I haven't kept count." She opened her mouth, closed it. The response had nowhere to land inside the framework she had been running on for 6 years. The afternoon she said it was a Tuesday in the third week of December. She was filing end-of-day records, the kind of work people do on autopilot when they are very tired and almost finished. Jihoon had his coat on, hat in hand, 3 steps from the door. She was not speaking to him. She may not have been speaking to anyone. 3 kids, single mom, 2 incomes that still don't cover 3. A short pause, the kind where someone decides whether to keep going. She kept going. Not exactly who anyone signs up for. Jihoon stopped. He stood with his back still partly turned, 3 steps from the door, and did not look around. Then they weren't paying attention. He left before she could answer. He walked 4 blocks back to the Radnor in the December cold and sat at his desk on the 29th floor, longer than necessary, thinking about a woman who said things like that into a stack of files at the end of a long day. About what it cost to say it. About the fact that she had not expected anyone to hear. He had heard. What neither of them had named yet, was the simple fact that Jihoon Seo had visited the same community health clinic in Humboldt Park 3 times in 1 quarter and was now going every week and had yet to find a single administrative issue that justified any of the trips. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the first week of January. No appointment, no reason offered. He walked into the waiting room at Meridian Community Health the way men like Vincent Harlow walked into rooms they hadn't been invited to, with the practiced composure of someone who had learned that the right amount of confidence could substitute for almost anything else people assumed you needed. Gray suit, 2-tone Oxford shoes, hair combed since morning and undisturbed since. He sat down, took out his phone, and studied the room with the eyes of a man who had arrived to observe, not to wait. Ji-hoon was at the far end of the hallway reviewing supply orders. When he came through, the 2 men passed within each other's line of sight across the waiting room for approximately 1 second. 2 men who did not yet know they were approaching the same problem from opposite directions, for Ji-hoon turned right toward the rear exit. Vincent did not know who he was. In everything that followed, that was the only thing that qualified as luck. Naomi Carter had been careful for 3 years in the way. People are careful when they understand that carelessness has a price. New number, no social media, cash rent in the first year. She had chosen Humboldt Park because she knew it, and Vincent never had. In November, Amani placed second in the district science fair. Her name appeared in the school district's public announcement. Full name, school name, grade. The kind of notice schools post without considering consequences. Vincent kept someone on retainer whose job was finding things. That person did their job. 3 years of careful ended because of a science fair ribbon. Amani came home on a Wednesday with a piece of paper from the front office. The school had received a call from a man who identified himself as her father, calm voice, polite. He had asked about Amani's schedule, her dismissal time, whether she had after-school activities on Thursdays. The front office staff, following protocol, provided nothing and logged the call. The paper included a reference number for Naomi to contact. Naomi looked at that piece of paper in her kitchen after the kids were asleep. She stood without moving for 17 minutes. Then she called Ji-hoon. He came to the clinic the following evening after closing, just the 2 of them in the building. She told him, not because he had earned it through any test she had designed, but because she had been holding a boundary alone for too long, and this time could not hold it by herself. Vincent Harlow was a litigator, skilled at argument, and had married Naomi when she was 22. What began small, "Why were you talking to him so long? Why did you wear that? Why didn't you ask me first?" grew the way floods grow. Slowly, and then all at once. He never hit her. He never needed to. He simply reduced her world until nothing remained outside what he permitted. No friends he didn't know. No accounts he didn't check. No opinion that hadn't been approved. And all of it delivered in a quiet voice, in the language of worry, with the patience of someone who understood. That you didn't need force if the architecture of control was solid enough. She left on the night of October 3rd. He was at a firm charity dinner at the Langham Hotel. She had 3 hours, 3 bags in the trunk, 3 children in the back seat. Imani 8, Kofi 4, Amara not yet 1. She pulled out of the garage at 7:23 p.m. and did not stop until the odometer read 294 miles, and Imani asked quietly from the back seat where they were going. She said, somewhere new. Imani did not ask again, 8 years old and already knowing enough not to. 3 years she built that somewhere new. Out of double shifts and weekly rent payments and assistance, wait lists and serial dinners, she apologized for every time she set them down. Now he knew where they were. Jihoon listened through all of it without interrupting once. When she stopped, the room held its quiet long enough for both of them to hear the old HVAC system still running. He picked up his phone. He knew which number to call, knew it without looking, had known it before she finished the first sentence. 1 call. 20 seconds. And Vincent Harlow would receive a message through a channel that required no courtroom, no discovery process, no judge. That was how it worked. It had always worked that way. He had handled more complicated things before breakfast on ordinary Tuesdays. His thumb stopped on the screen. Gee. Kofi was standing in the doorway. Jacket on because Naomi had told him to put it on. Chessboard held in both hands, looking at Ji-hoon with the uncomplicated expression of someone waiting for their turn. You didn't leave yet. We didn't finish game 9. Ji-hoon looked at the boy, looked at the phone, set it face down on the table. I'm coming, he said. 3:14 a.m. 29th floor, the Radnor. The desk, the lamp, the phone screen showing one outgoing call. Rachel Yoon, 3:14 a.m., 22 min 07 sec. He set it down and watched the screen dim until it went dark. He had used Rachel 5 years ago for a matter that needed to be handled correctly under the law. She had handled it correctly. He had paid her fee, no remaining debts between them. Tonight, he called again, not to collect, to pay a new retainer and explain everything from the beginning. She had listened, asked 11 questions, said she needed 2 days to review. He agreed. Now it was 3:14 a.m., and he was sitting in an apartment with no sofa, no dining table, nothing in the kitchen, except coffee and a box of cereal he had bought 2 months ago and never opened. He realized he was hungry. For the first time in months, the absence of things in this apartment registered not as a deliberate choice, but simply as what happened when a person had never had a reason to think about it. Oh. He ordered from the Thai place on Clark Street. 47 minutes estimated. He sat at the desk for those 47 minutes and did nothing. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago was still lit the way it never fully wasn't. The phone lay face down on the desk. No further calls were made. For the first time in 11 years, he had chosen the harder road, not because anyone asked, not because he feared the other one, because a 7-year-old had been standing in a doorway, holding a chessboard. And Ji-hoon had not wanted to become the kind of man that boy would eventually figure out. Vincent Harlow had spent 6 years building a life that depended on Naomi Carter having nowhere to stand. Alec. What he hadn't accounted for was the man now spending 3 a.m. on the phone, making sure she had ground beneath her feet, and choosing, for the first time, to do it the right way. Rachel Yoon called back on Friday morning with the voice of someone who had finished reading the file and knew exactly what she was working with. She took the case. Ji-hoon paid the full fee, not a favor, not a reminder of anything owed. Hourly rate, standard contract beginning immediately. Rachel worked the way good lawyers work. No noise, no overcommitting, only gathering. 11 years of Amani's school records, parent conferences, recitals, the November science fair where she placed second. Vincent Harlow's name appeared nowhere. Medical records for Kofi and Amara across their combined 11 years of life. No paternal signature on a single form. Alec. A former neighbor in Evanston agreed to testify about what she had heard through the shared wall for 3 years without anyone ever asking. The front office administrator at Imani's school had logged Vincent's November call and agreed to describe it. Not a large case. More than nothing, and nothing was what Vincent had been counting on. Jihoon found Imani on a Wednesday evening in the middle of February. She was alone in the small office at the end of the hall, sitting at the desk where Jihoon had sat with Naomi on the night she told him everything. In front of her was a multi-page county form in small print, low-income household assistance, the kind that required 20 uninterrupted minutes and full clarity to complete without error. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. Naomi had not filled this form. Naomi had not had time. Imani was filling it in her place. Jihoon stepped in, sat down across from her, looked at the form for a moment, picked it up. "This isn't your job." Imani looked at him. "Mom doesn't have time." "I know." He placed the form on the desk in front of himself, not in front of her. "But this isn't your job. You're 11. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the form now sitting on his side of the desk, then back at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not a collapse, surrender. The particular kind of release that happens only when a weight is lifted by someone else big enough to hold it. She cried. Not much, not loudly. The way someone cries who has no habit of crying in front of others. Jihoon said nothing further. He took a pen, opened the form, and began filling it in. Frozen moment 3. Naomi came out of the back room 12 minutes later. She saw the form on the desk, nearly complete, and Jihoon's handwriting across it. Small, even, precise. In a way that was almost architectural. Each character placed inside its box with consistent spacing, not one stroke wasted. Not the handwriting of the man she had believed she understood. She looked at his hands. The right one. The scar between the index finger and thumb that Kofi had asked about. Holding the pen with a care that matched nothing she had known about him until tonight, she said nothing. He didn't look up. Imani sat beside him, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a child who had just been given permission to stop being the adult for one evening. Naomi filed what she understood into a place, without a name, and did not take it out until she needed it. He came on a Thursday afternoon, not to the clinic, to the sidewalk outside Imani's school, where Naomi stood waiting every week at 3:15 p.m. He approached from the east, walking at a measured pace as though simply passing through, the kind of coincidence that had been calculated to the last detail. Naomi? Not a question, a confirmation. She didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the school entrance. Vincent stood 2 steps away, his voice level, unhurried, the tone of someone reading a weather report. "I want you to know that I know who the man helping you is. Seo Ji-hoon." A short pause. "Do you know what he actually runs?" She did not turn toward him. "I'm not threatening you," he continued. "I'm simply asking whether you want to stand in front of a judge and explain why your children have been spending time with that man." The judge will ask. My attorney will ask. I'm wondering whether the answer helps your case. The school doors opened. Imani came out. Kofi 1 step behind. Vincent was already gone. She did not call Jihoon that evening. She didn't call the next day. She came to the clinic on Tuesday, did her work, reviewed the patient's schedule with Mrs. Okafor, replied to Rachel's procedural messages. When Jihoon arrived for the Wednesday review, she greeted him by name, asked about the February invoices, and returned to her files. Professional. Precise. Nothing visibly wrong, but Naomi Carter was never only professional. She was always warmer than that. She remembered names. She asked patients about their dogs. She spoke to Amara in a register she reserved for nothing else. By the 3rd day, Jihoon recognized what he was looking at. He did not ask. He sent no message asking what had changed. He offered no defense, no explanation, no attempt to shape what she thought of him. He came to the Wednesday review as scheduled, checked the operational reports, signed the invoices, left. The following week, he came back and did the same things. Kofi played 1 game with Danny Park during this period because Jihoon hadn't arrived by the time they usually started. Kofi 1. He recorded it in the notebook under Danny Park's name, not Ji-hoon's. But he recorded it. Ji-hoon waited, not because he misunderstood what had happened, but because this decision belonged to Naomi alone. And steering her toward any conclusion, however gently, would have been an exact repetition of what Vincent had done to her for 6 years. Deciding for her what she should think, believe, choose. He sat inside that silence and waited. 5 days before the hearing, she came to find him. The clinic was closed. The hallway light was still on. He was in the small office at the end of the hall, reading documents Rachel had sent. She walked in without knocking, sat across from him, put her hands flat on the desk. She told him what Vincent had said, every word, in the order she remembered it. No added commentary. When she finished, she looked at him directly. I know who you are, he did not interrupt, did not deny, did not explain. I chose to be here anyway. The room held its quiet. Both of them could hear the old HVAC system running in the walls. Ji-hoon said, "That's not a small thing." "Naomi, I know. Nothing further. Nothing further was needed." This was the moment it was earned. Not given, not declared, not explained. Two adults looking at each other in enough light to see clearly, and choosing, with full information, to stay. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on March 19th in courtroom 14B of the Richard J. Daley Center. And for the first time in 6 years, Naomi Carter walked toward a fight, knowing that someone was walking beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. Courtroom 14B occupied the 14th floor of the Richard J. Daley Center at 50 West Washington Street, a room that managed to be both ordinary and final, the kind of space where the architecture itself suggested that what happened here was not easily undone. The benches were full by 9:15. Rachel sat at one table, Vincent's attorney, a litigator named Clark, who billed at rates that averaged more per hour than most of Ji-hoon's clinic staff earned in a day, sat at the other. Vincent himself sat beside Clark in a dark charcoal suit and the composed expression of a man who had prepared for this version of events. He had prepared thoroughly. That was, in the end, the only version of himself he knew how to offer. The narrative Clark presented was clean and well-rehearsed. A devoted father. A troubled marriage that ended when his wife took the children across state lines without notice, without court order, without giving him the opportunity to respond. Alec, a man who had been denied access to his own children for 3 years and was asking only for what the law had always entitled him to. Clark told the story well. Ji-hoon, seated in the back row, heard it and understood exactly why Naomi had spent 3 years afraid of precisely this. Rachel did not rush. She laid it out in layers, the way a person removes weight from something fragile, one piece at a time until what remains is fully visible. The first layer, 11 years of Imani Carter's school records, parent-teacher conferences, science fairs, 5th grade graduation, the district spelling bee in the spring of 2nd grade, a field trip permission slip from March of the year Imani turned 7. Rachel read the list without commentary. Vincent Harlow's name appeared on none of them, not once in 11 years. The second layer, pediatric records, Kofi's wellness visits from infancy through age 6, Amara's complete medical file from birth. The signature fields for the second guardian were present on every form, filled in on none. The name of the children's father did not appear in a single clinical record from the years in question. The third layer, the neighbor from Evanston, a woman named Denise, 53 years old, 4 years in the unit adjacent to the Harlow residence. She described what she had heard through the shared wall in language that was plain and specific, and did not require interpretation. She said she had always wondered whether she should have said something sooner. She said she was saying something now. The fourth layer. The front office administrator from Imani's school. She described the November phone call in precise detail. The calm voice, the specific questions. I jealous about the girl's schedule. The ease with which the caller identified himself as her father. She had logged the call because she had been trained to log calls that felt wrong. That one had felt wrong, even though she couldn't have explained why at the time. Clark objected to portions of each layer. The judge noted the objections and overruled them, one after another, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been listening carefully from the start. Jihoon. Jihoon was in the corridor outside when Vincent walked past. He was sitting on a bench with Amara on his lap, her back against his chest, giraffe held loosely in both her hands. Mrs. Okafor had offered to watch her during the testimony. Amara had declined by the simple method of climbing onto Jihoon and not coming down, and no one had argued the point. Her attention moved the way 3-year-old's attention moved. From the giraffe to the ceiling, light to a man in a brown coat, checking his phone across the corridor, to the giraffe again. She had not seen her father in close to 2 years. She would not have known to expect him here. When Vincent came through the corridor door, she looked up. She looked at him the way she looked at new things, openly, without preconception, without the categorizing that comes later when people have learned to assign history to a stranger's expression. She was 3. She had not yet learned those things. She held Giraffe a little tighter. Then she turned her face into Jihoon's chest and did not look back. It was a small thing, a child shifting her weight. Nothing more than that. The bailiff, standing near the door, saw it. The judge's clerk, coming through the same corridor 40 seconds later, saw it. A 3-year-old's instinct is not testimony. It does not establish fact. It cannot be entered into the record. But it cannot be unseen either. Naomi took the stand at 11:23 a.m. She had not slept well the night before. She had told Jihoon this plainly on the phone the previous evening, not asking for reassurance, simply stating it the way she stated things that were true. He had told her to say exactly what had happened, in the order it happened, and not to explain more than she was asked to explain. She sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and the shake in her voice was present from the first sentence and did not prevent a single word from being said clearly. She talked about the years, about what it felt like to have a world made smaller by someone who called it love, about the night she left, the 3 bags, the garage door at 7:23 p.m., the odometer reading 294 miles, Amani's quiet voice in the back seat asking where they were going. She said she had told her daughter they were going somewhere new. She said Amani had not asked again. She said that had been the moment she understood how much her 8-year-old already knew. She talked about what came after. The cereal dinners she apologized for every time she set them down. The double shifts, the weeks when she ran the numbers 4 times because she could not believe they came out the same way each time. She did not perform. She did not ask for sympathy. She answered Clark's cross-examination directly and did not give ground where she didn't need to, and did not pretend she had it where she didn't. Then Rachel gave her the space to say what needed to be said. She looked at the judge, not at Clark, not at Vincent. I'm not a perfect mother. My kids have had cereal for dinner more times than I want to count. I am tired every single day. But Imani is 11 years old, and she is teaching herself algebra because no one told her she had to stop. Kofi has a notebook where he keeps score of every chess game he plays with a man who comes every week to learn from a 7-year-old. My youngest daughter named her stuffed giraffe after that Seisei man because he got down on the floor of a lobby to talk to her at eye level instead of calling security. I drove 294 miles in one night, so my children could have that. I am not giving it back. The courtroom was quiet for a moment after she finished. Clark tried to recover. The ground had shifted, not dramatically, not with any visible announcement, but in the way that certain moments change the pressure of a room. Everyone present could feel it. Some of them would not forget it. The ruling came 14 minutes after both sides rested. Full custody to Naomi Carter. Supervised visitation for Vincent Harlow, contingent on completion of a 52-week intervention program. All contact coordinated through the court. The judge noted on the record that the evidence presented documented a pattern of controlling behavior spanning multiple years and multiple witnesses, and that the stability and safety of the children constituted the court's primary consideration, above any parental claim of entitlement. Vincent did not look at Naomi when the ruling was read. He looked at the table in front of him. His expression was composed. It cost him something to hold it that way. That was between him and whoever he was when no one was watching. Outside the Daily Center, the march light came in low and flat off the buildings on Washington Street. Balak. Amani stood a few feet away, watching the pigeons on the courthouse steps with the focused attention of someone who needed to look at something uncomplicated for a while. Kofi was explaining something to Amara that Amara was not following but was politely pretending to. Amara had giraffe tucked under one arm and was nodding at intervals. Naomi turned to Ji-hoon. "You didn't use your phone." He was quiet for a moment. "Kofi's keeping score in that notebook. 7 wins out of 23. A pause. "I didn't want him to figure out who I actually was before he made it to 30. The March air sat between them for a second. He would have figured it out anyway." "Yes," Naomi said. He would have. Neither of them said anything else. On the steps, Amara had decided the pigeon situation required her direct involvement and was moving toward it with great purpose. Giraffe tucked under one arm. Kofi went after her. Amani went after Kofi. Ji-hoon watched the three of them and said nothing. There was nothing that needed saying. What came next? The months after, the slow accumulation of an ordinary life built from small and deliberate choices. None of it arrived with ceremony. It arrived the way most true things arrive. One Wednesday morning at a time. 6 months is not long enough to change a person. What it is long enough for is this: a person who's decided to change and who makes that decision again every morning, and who makes that decision again every morning, can look different at the end of it. Not unrecognizable. Different in the way that matters, in the way that sticks. See? That Ji-hoon at 32, 6 months after the ruling in courtroom 14B, was still running CO security group from the 31st floor of the Radnor. The parts of the operation that existed in the light remained in the light. The parts that existed elsewhere were being extracted, slowly, with the patience of someone who understood that speed in that particular direction produced problems that took years to resolve. He had made the decision. He was making it again each morning. That was the honest version. What was also true was that the 29th floor apartment now had a sofa. Kofi had been the one to say it. Not as a complaint, as a statement of observable fact, delivered in the matter-of-fact register he applied to most things. "You don't have any chairs. We always sit on the floor." Ji-hoon had looked around the apartment with the eyes of someone being shown, something that had always been visible and had somehow not been seen. He bought the sofa the following week, then a coffee table because there was nowhere to put things, then a second chair because one chair in an apartment with a sofa looked like an oversight. By April, there was a dining table with four chairs around it. Danny Park came to collect a document one afternoon and stood in the entryway for a moment, longer than he needed to, looking at the table before collecting the document and leaving without comment. He had known Ji-hoon for 9 years. He did not need to say anything. He had seen enough to know what a dining table with 4 chairs meant in this particular apartment. Kofi updated the notebook after every game. The current record stood at 7 wins for Ji-hoon out of 23 played. Kofi kept the remainder. The notebook had migrated from Kofi's jacket pocket to a kitchen drawer in the apartment, where it lived between a takeout menu and a box of rubber bands that had come with the apartment, and that no one had a use for. Kofi checked. It was still there each time he came over, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone responsible for accurate record-keeping. In the second week of April, Ji-hoon won Game 8. Kofi wrote it down, studied the entry for a moment, then looked up. "You're getting better." Ji-hoon said, I have a good teacher. Kofi put the pencil away and closed the notebook with the considered air of someone filing important information. He did not make a large thing of it. That was not how Kofi operated. He had simply noted the fact the same way he noted everything, carefully, accurately, and without performance. Imani showed Ji-hoon the essay on a Thursday evening in late April. She handed it to him without preamble. 3 handwritten pages, the top one reading in the careful print she used when she cared about something. The person you trust not because they are strong, but because they chose not to do the easy thing. She stood beside him while he read. He got through a page and a half before she took it back. She did not explain what she had taken back. She folded it once and put it in the front pocket of her backpack, which she then zipped with the finality of someone closing a subject. Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon said nothing. He had read enough. The evening she asked him, it was May. The nights were still cool enough to need a jacket. Ji-hoon was waiting in the hallway outside Naomi's apartment. He had come to return Kofi's notebook, left behind at the clinic that afternoon, and Imani came out before her mother did. She always came out first. Ji-hoon understood by now that this was not coincidence. This was what she had done for 6 years. With every person who had gotten close enough to matter, she came out first to take the measure of them, to ask the question she let herself believe the answer. She looked at him. Are you going to leave? Lahim? The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the building a door closed. The light above the elevator bank hummed its single low note. Ji-hoon did not answer immediately. He stood with the notebook in his hand and let the question sit for the moment it deserved before he spoke. People told me, he said, that a woman like your mother, 3 kids on her own, no one stays, that it was too much, that the calculation didn't work out. Imani watched him. Didn't work out. Imani watched him. They were wrong. She held his gaze of someone, the particular steadiness of someone whether to believe something they have wanted to believe for a long time, and have been careful not to let themselves. Then she nodded, once the short decisive nod she gave to things she had finished considering. She turned and went back inside. She did not say anything to her mother. She didn't need to. Naomi had been standing just inside the door. When Naomi stepped into the hallway, Ji-hoon held out the notebook. She took it, looked at him. He said, I want to stay. No ring. No prepared words. No moment chosen for its suitability. Just a Tuesday evening hallway in a building in Humboldt Park, and a man who had spent 32 years not staying anywhere, saying the only thing that was true. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Staying means, you know who I am. She meant all of it. The double shifts, the serial dinners, the 3 children who came first, who would always come first, who were not a condition attached to loving her, but the whole fact of her. I know who you chose to be, he said. She meant all of it, too. What he was working toward becoming. The gap between them, real, not closed, not pretended away. Her eyes were open. She had chosen to be here anyway. She nodded. Okay. That was all. A Wednesday morning in May, unremarkable by every measure. Ji-hoon arrived early. Kofi had left the notebook at the clinic again, a pattern that was beginning to look like a system. Naomi opened the door in her scrubs, Amara on her hip, giraffe tucked under the giraffe's arm. The neck had been resewn a 4th time last week, white thread this time, applied by Imani while Amara supervised. Kofi was at the table in his school's uniform eating cereal and reading something on his mother's old tablet, not looking up. Because Ji-hoon arriving in the morning was no longer something that required acknowledgement. Back. Imani was standing at the counter with her backpack already on, tying her hair back, and she gave him the short nod she gave to people she trusted. Nothing more, nothing less. But from Imani Carter, that nod was not a small thing, and both of them knew it. The apartment was loud in the ordinary way. Families are loud in the morning. Amara had something urgent to communicate about Giraffe's 4th resewn neck. Kofi had a question about whether knights in chess had ever existed in real life, and whether they were better on horses or off. The television in the corner was running a weather forecast that no one was watching. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. He had grown up in rooms that were silent because silence meant no one was fighting. He had spent 11 years building rooms that were silent because he had decided that was what he wanted. No one close enough to break anything, no one present enough to leave. 32 years of quiet he had called, at various times, peace, strategy, efficiency, preference. He stepped into the apartment. The noise closed around him. Amara reached for him. Kofi looked up from the tablet. Amani picked up her bag and said goodbye to everyone in the room, including him, and walked out the door to school. He stood in the middle of the kitchen and understood something he had no prior language for. This was not a thing he had built. He did not know, at 32, how to build this. This was a thing he had found. In a lobby at 8:47 on a Tuesday evening, crouched on marble floors, learning the name of a stuffed giraffe from a 3-year-old who saw something in him before he had any reason to show it. The noise was his now, too. Ji-hoon did not become someone different because love changed him. Love does not work that way. Not at 32, not for anyone who has lived the way he had lived. What happened was simpler and harder than that. A 7-year-old asked about a scar and he chose to answer honestly. An 11-year-old was filling out paperwork at 10 o'clock at night and he chose to take it out o'clock at night, and he chose to out of her hands. He picked up a phone in a moment when using it. Would have been easy and fast and completely in keeping with everything he had always been. And he put it down. Not because someone asked him to. Not because he was afraid of the consequences of the other choice. Because he had spent 32 years carrying the capacity to protect people the right way without ever having had a reason to use it. And then, on the 14th of October, a 3-year-old girl walked into his lobby and told him her giraffe's name. He had been paying attention. Before you go, I need to know something. Which moment got to you? Was it Imani filling out that form at 9:47 at night? Was it Kofi asking about the scar and deciding that was enough information to offer a chess game? Was it Amara turning her face away from the man she had every reason to go to, and into the chest of the man she had chosen, Ward? Or was it the hallway, that Tuesday evening when nothing was prepared and nothing was performed, and two people who had both been through too much just looked at each other and told the truth? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I always notice which moments people come back to. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it today. Not because you think they're going through something hard, because sometimes people need through something hard. Because there are still stories where people be reminded that there, when choosing right, people choose right, even when choosing right costs something. And if this is your first time here, subscribe, because this is what we do on this channel. Every story, every week. The ones that remind us what people are actually capable of when they decide to be. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.